Murray. Murray, that is so crazy. I almost wore that shirt. Literally. That would have been.
I prefer yours. I want to wear yours. Yours looks much nicer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Slight work over here, just slight work. Well, you all please introduce yourselves, names, pronouns, and what you all do at your institutions. For the audience, I'm Kevin. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Unibuddy. I work with our universities in US and Canada, and I use he, him pronouns. And then who would like to go next?
I'll go. Hi, I'm Jamila Walker. I'm the University Social Media Manager at Old Dominion University, which is in Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm also an adjunct professor here as well. So from 9 to 5, I am handling social media for the university, as well as being the liaison for other social media administrators here on campus, and working with our marketing team and our videographers and our web team on branding Old Dominion University, coming up with social media campaigns and strategies, especially in this time, to really promote the school and for prospective students. And then after 5, I am teaching online, and I'm teaching marketing and leadership promotions.
Awesome. I'm happy to go next. So my name's Murray. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Net Natives. I work with universities and colleges in the US, the UK, Europe, all over, consulting them on their marketing and recruitment strategies to best market and recruit students around the world. I've worked a lot with institutions over the last 6 months on a few research projects that have specifically spoken about diversity in marketing and how represented students feel in advertising. So with the aim of educating universities on how they can be more inclusive and diverse when it comes to their promotional materials or what they do on campus. So looking forward to sharing that with you guys today and discussing some of those. And pronouns are he, him.
Afternoon, everybody, or I guess I don't know what time it is for everyone. We have folks from all over the place. My name is Charee Mosby-Holloway. My pronouns are she and her, or just Charee is fine as well. I currently serve as the Director of Student Diversity and Inclusion at Colombia College Chicago. So the role of our office is really to support the larger DEI mission of the college, so the diversity, equity, and inclusion mission of the college. We do that through programming and student support. So we are really engaging with students, after the marketing has kind of done its job. We're really engaging with students once they are on campus and enrolled as students. I also am a lecturer in the School of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago. So I can relate to Jamila. I have the 9 to 5 and then online from 5 to 8 on Monday evenings teaching. So that resonates a lot with me.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. I also want to point out, anytime any of you have questions, please pop them in there, type them in. We'll ask them throughout the entire session. This is a discussion, and everyone is included in this discussion today. But I'm going to start off with some questions first to get the ball rolling. So I'm asking all of you this question: what does true representation look like? What does that embody? And I think that's a great kind of starting point for us with the conversation today. So either any of you can go ahead and start.
I'll get the ball rolling. Representation for me is kind of seeing myself in the university specifically, and making sure that we're all represented. Here at Old Dominion University, we are considered a minority serving institution. So we do have a lot of students, faculty, staff from all over, different cultures, different race. And so we try to also emphasize that and show that in our marketing and advertising, as well as in our social media, so that we aren't just saying we are, we're showing you that we are, and that we represent you, and that you will feel, appreciated here, welcome here. And so I think that's important anywhere, and especially at the university and that I'm working at.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think a statement I always liked that we used to say in our last university was always that you can't be what you can't see. And I think that relates to so many different groups out there. And I think feeling represented is so important, just so you know that things are accessible and that it's not out of reach just because of your background. And I think that needs to play into any type of marketing or anything we do in life, really. So yeah, I think representation is so important, and especially for groups of widening participation where there's less accessibility to education, I think it plays an even more prominent part in people's decision-making process.
I think from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective at the sort of higher education level, I would add that I think representation is consistent. So I think that students, are having a consistent experience from when they are recruited to through the admissions process, through their time on, their specific campus, and post-graduation as well. That the mission and values of the college are consistent and that the student experience is consistent in a holistic manner.
Interesting that you mentioned consistency, because that's one of my questions for today. And I'm throwing it out there. I guess this is just to Charee and Jamila, but also to people in the audience as well too. Have you noticed the difference between what is marketed by higher ed institutions and the actual environment of their campuses? You see that jiving in some places, not in other places. What does that look like? And Charee or Jamila, either one of you could kind of start off with that.
I'll go again. So I think here at ODU, our advertising, our marketing is reflective of what you see on campus. I work in strategic communications and marketing office. So I do get to see firsthand what these ads are going to look like before it actually goes out to the public. And our team really does a good job in really trying to diversify the marketing and making sure that we're not just showing one race or one culture, like we're really showing everything. And I think that's reflective here. We have thousands, or my favorite word, plethora of organizations that are diverse, that there's something for everyone. And that is just shown on campus here. I'm on campus right now, and I'm just, even with the students that we have here right now, just walking on campus, you just see such a diverse body, and I think that's important, and it's shown in our marketing, our assets, and everything.
I miss seeing students walk around campus. Like I haven't seen them in so long.
Me too.
So I think in terms of differences, so at Colombia College Chicago, we are an urban campus and a vertical campus. So we're located right in the heart of Chicago in the South Loop. Our buildings are interspersed throughout all the other downtown Chicago buildings. And so that's a big part of our marketing. So in terms of diversity, I think it makes it in some respects relatively straightforward. You're in Chicago, that's one of the most diverse cities in the United States. However, I think you complicate that narrative when you move into inclusion. And I think we see the parallels in the actual city of Chicago. It is incredibly diverse among racial, economic, religious lines, but it's also very, very segregated along those same lines, especially in terms of race and socioeconomic status. So thinking about our students at Columbia, our incoming class is almost half identify as students of color, which, for us is fantastic. That is really meeting our goals and speaks to the awesome job that our recruitment and admissions team has done. However, if you look at full-time faculty at Columbia, about 81% of those folks identify as white. And so I think that when you sort of dig down into those narratives a little bit deeper, you see opportunities for growth. And so how do we get our faculty, our full-time faculty, those demographics to be as representative as our student body? So I think there are opportunities for growth there if sometimes you dig into those narratives a little bit deeper.
And I guess, Murray, you can probably share some research here on what kind of, not just the narratives that students are showing, but some of the data that's kind of important to prospective students. Mainly, like, why is it important prospective students feel represented in these environments? And then once you share that data, if Jamila and Charee, if you all can also talk about some of the narratives that you've heard from the students you work with to kind of support that data as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we conducted some research this year. We've done 2 different projects now to essentially survey current students in the US and the UK. So we've got 2 different reports to essentially find out how represented they feel by the university when it comes to its marketing. And did they, when they joined the university, feel that that advertising was actually a reality, which I think is really important when it comes to how you promote any institution or any product. And we did find a few, there were kind of 2 key findings from the overall research paper, but there were also some quite shocking statistics about how students felt. And I think one of the things that we noticed was around disingenuous activism from a lot of institutions, where they felt a lot of students could kind of see through that. And I know a lot of institutions will do posts in solidarity or in support of certain movements, particularly this year. But whether the university actually practices what it preaches and talks about things it actually does to support inclusion at its institution is very different. And a lot of students would actually be calling out universities saying, well, you've done this post, but you don't actually promote inclusion at our institution. You promote diversity in terms of a diverse student body because of the images you use and maybe the copy you use, but you're not actually promoting inclusion, which might be about an environment where students can realize their full potential and support things that you do on campus to actually enable student success and student retention. And so I think that piece overall was the key finding from the research, is that as marketers, as recruiters, it's really challenging for us because we're trying to promote diversity and inclusion, but we have little authority or influence over the inclusion aspect at our institutions. And that can be really challenging. And hopefully today we can discuss ways in which we've been successful at that in our own institutions, and people can hopefully share ways in which they've done that as well on the live chat. Because otherwise we are promoting things that aren't a reality for a lot of students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say in my experience, it is extremely important, as someone who worked in international admissions and international student services, that whatever you're telling on the road is the same kind of experience or embodies the experiences the students are having. And I have seen where sometimes that does not necessarily jive. I want to make sure that I'm telling the right story. How can you tell those stories? Especially for those of us who are here as admissions counselors or in admission, how do you tell those stories, and why is that important as well? You already said why it's important, but how can people tell those stories?
And I think Jamila and Charee probably have examples of maybe how they've seen it happen on campus. But from my experience, storytelling is a huge part of marketing, and I think some institutions have done a great job of telling the stories of their students, rather than using their USPs and these diversity statistics. They're actually showcasing the success of the students they have in a way that is showing that they're proud of them, but is also raising aspirations for those who might want to attend the university in the future. Storytelling, from my perspective, it has to be genuine. And I think that's where they're saying, this is disingenuous advertising, this is disingenuous activism, right? Show that you're really proud of us by showcasing our stories, and also showcasing how you helped us get there. You gave us a degree or a master's, but how did you help me through the experience? How did you help retain me? How did you help me realize that was truly what I could achieve? Rather than just saying, oh, we gave you a degree and you went on to do great things. You need to do so much more for students.
Yeah, I think just speaking on my experience at Columbia, it's so different. It's the first arts and media school that I've ever worked at. And so it's a creative place. And all of the students that are there, the faculty, many of the staff are practitioners in various creative industries, as well as working at the college or going to school at the college. And so I think in terms of showcasing stories, it's really built into the mission of the college of sort of helping students shape their own stories and be the authors of their own stories. So I think in that respects, in terms of marketing, putting students and their experiences and their work, their actual portfolio and product sort of front and center is something that the college does really well. From sort of organizational perspective, one of the things I really appreciate specifically about being at Columbia is that I have a regular sort of robust relationship with our admissions team. And so communicating with those folks on the regular, being part of some of the programming that they're doing and outreaching to students, so that students are also interfacing with the folks that they're going to see, every day once they arrive on campus. And so I think involving lots of folks that occupies different positionalities at the college or the university is a really smart way in providing some of that consistency for students.
Jamila, I wasn't sure if you had something to add to that.
You said it all. No, but just to piggyback, it's kind of the same way at ODU. We have a lot of student profiles of news stories, videos, because students want to see themselves. And we have a lot of faculty and students and, showing what they're doing, what ODU has done for them. Even in the videos, we have like a faculty or a professor that's really worked with the student, have them engaged. And so we have a lot of those storytelling profiles. When I first got to ODU, they did a campaign, "You Are Welcome Here," and showed a video of the diversity and inclusion that we have here on campus. And so that went really well. So kind of having the students and the ODU community kind of tell their own stories, and we just kind of promote the content, and it kind of speaks for itself. So those are just kind of the things that we have, and they can kind of be evergreen, such as when we were dealing with the racial injustice here, and a lot of the African American voices feeling like they've just been silenced. It's with the opportunity here to kind of pull out those student profiles and say, we hear you, and here are these phenomenal Black students who've gone on and done great things or are still here, and this is what they're doing. So kind of using our resources and being strategic of the profiles and storytelling that we do.
I was actually going to say, Jamila, that we found that 60% of students didn't feel like their university advertising or marketing represented them. And I think there's a big wave of institutions still just using stock imagery. And we've actually seen like different institutions using the same imagery in their advertising. And obviously being a global agency, you kind of see a good spread. And I would really encourage institutions to use their own students. We're talking about storytelling here and being genuine in your messaging, and using stock imagery of people just to show you're diverse really shows that you're not diverse, if that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think in informing students in that process too, just personally, I attended many moons ago, attended a predominantly white institution that I graduated from. And I remember seeing myself on the diversity brochure, just like I was sitting on a bench, like reading a book for class. And I was like, wait a second. Like no one had asked me or anything. And I literally popped up on the brochure. And it was one of those moments where I was like, this is a lot just as a student. And it was a very direct way to just sort of let me know that I'm an other. Right? Because not only did I sort of pop up on this brochure, but I wasn't even aware of it, right? No one had sort of contacted me, or I didn't get that chance to sort of tell my story. So on a very personal level, that's always something I think about, of just like, why am I on this brochure?
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of brought that up too, because it's so important that when you are, because someone actually just brought this up in the chat as well. Shout out to Dan from Bishop's University in Canada, about like not using stock photos. But also I'm so glad that Charee, you brought up too, yes, you should use your current students, but also ask permission. I would say one thing that I've been taught as someone who went to an art and media school is you always ask permission to use someone's image and their likeness, and sometimes some institutions don't do that. So yes, please use your students' photos, but also make sure you ask them for permission as well too. And that's also really important. And that leads me to a question that's from Carolina. What have been some of the key barriers you've found at your institutions in terms of inclusion? And Jamila, if you would like to go ahead and kind of start with that, and then we'll go to Charee.
Any key barriers? I'm not, and I don't want to pose like ODU is perfect in
Mhm.
this inclusion diversity, because we're not. But I've been here for 3.5 years, and we do a lot of things right. And so I'm not sure for me personally if I've really had any key barriers on inclusion being doing social here. I feel like we've been very transparent. The president here has been very transparent, and we do have a lot of committees. I don't want to say task force groups, like we said before, but that's what it is. We do have diversity task force that we work with. We have the Office of Intercultural Relations. We have the President's Diversity Task Force. So we they kind of work a lot on different events and different things with the students and faculty, so that we can come together. So I don't know if I'm the best person for the barriers, but right now we haven't really had any, that I know. And if we did, I guess we've been very good at hiding it. But I think we've just really been authentic and transparent in what we stand for and our mission here.
I think that, I've worked at several institutions, and I have to say that being at Columbia, we have one of the strongest sort of DEI missions for any college that I've ever worked at, which is one of the reasons that I came here. I think some of the barriers, challenges, opportunities, however you want to frame that I faced, are a lot around language, which I don't necessarily think is Columbia specific. But I think words like diversity, equity, and inclusion can be really tricky because you use the words to define themselves. And so it just becomes like a snake sort of eating its tail. So when you ask folks, like, what makes a place diverse? Or why do you value diversity? Well, we value diversity because we are diverse, and it's important to value diversity. And like, okay, yes, but what does it actually what does it actually mean? Or if you ask them what inclusion means, it's, oh well, it means that a place is diverse. Or so I think that sometimes that can be a little bit tricky, is sort of figuring out how you are defining those terms, as well as what are your metrics for success. We all know that there's no sort of endpoint for inclusion, right? Like that it is always going to be ongoing, which I think is a challenge in and of itself. Folks are sort of looking for an arrival point, and there really isn't one, right? It's a constant ongoing process. But really sort of figuring out, what do those terms mean? How are you using them on your college? And then how do you hold yourself accountable to those terms? And I think that is the work that, certainly at Columbia, the work that we are like in the midst of every single day, which for me is really exciting. The other thing I would say is I think that it's sometimes very hard in higher education to recognize that there can be multiple approaches to this work. So it's not the responsibility of one office or one person or one task force or one committee. It has to be literally everywhere, from your marketing to your curriculum to your recruitment of faculty, staff, and students to your hiring practices. It should be happening everywhere and should be happening consistently. And I think sometimes that's a challenge just across the board in higher ed.
And I feel as if and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel as if that when it comes to it being everywhere, that most importantly should be inclusive of students. And I feel as if sometimes within the higher ed structure, there's this notion that students are unaware of what is going on. But in my experience, students are very aware. you know? Is that something that Jamila and Charee, that you have both kind of seen as well too, that there is a big awareness of what's happening within the institution, as well as the structures within the institution too?
Yeah, students are extremely aware of what's going on. Um, they know before I even know.
Hmm.
So I'll see on social media, and they're having a conversation. This generation is very vocal, and they're very vocal here at ODU, um, and to an extent, we accept it and we also respect it. We've had a lot of come together with students on issues. If they're, feel strongly about something, we give them that opportunity to speak on it. So yeah, the students know, and they voice their opinions, and they will be the first one to call the university out if we have done something, or they found out something for last minute. But we do the best we can to kind of work with that. And showcase that we are here for them. We're here for the community. They do have a voice here too, and we respect that and allow that also.
I think I would be interested, especially from Murray's perspective, right, of how students responded to surveys, and how sort of in touch they are with the colleges and universities. I think in my experience, I've just sort of accepted in my career that I'll always be two steps behind knowing what students know. They always have their own sort of internal networks, right? Like one student has an internship in the president's office and gets all the tea, and then can tell everybody else. Um, so they're always, kind of knowing what's going on. I think that's also a real sort of an untapped resource. Um, for myself, right, in thinking of what are things that we need to be paying attention to specifically in my role of diversity and inclusion. um, I might not find all the information I need from a survey. I might need to sort of go to where students are meeting, and so I might have to figure out like what Discord is, and how do I figure out like what students are talking about in the Discord chat, because that has been the platform that students are now using to develop like affinity group spaces. And
Hmm.
so I think that we have to, pay attention to where students are coming from. There's that old saying in student support and development work of, meet students where they are. And
Hmm.
sometimes that is like quite literal. You have to figure out where they are and what they're talking about and what platforms they're using to engage.
And I think that's where it can be very difficult, because although you can meet students where they are, quite often they won't necessarily tell you how they really feel if you work for the university. They might often feel more comfortable speaking to other students or their own students' union or student association, where they feel they can be a bit more honest, or even like less fearful of any backlash that might happen, even though I'm sure that wouldn't be the case. There's quite often, when it comes to research projects, that ability to potentially not get the best results. I actually used to work in a student union in the UK, and I was the SU president, and students would always come to me and the vice presidents and talk to us about issues they were facing that they just wouldn't feel comfortable talking to the university about themselves. And so I think being able to utilize student ambassadors, student champions, student associations, and the different groups that are within that student association or union is a really powerful way of getting feedback from students. Whilst I do find survey data really helpful, it can definitely identify trends and statistics. I often find that can be used to give marketers, recruiters, staff at universities data to change things in their institution, right? Did you know that 1 in 10 students, only 1 in 10 feel represented in their advertising? Okay, let's use that statistic to push a change. Quite often we work with academics who like data and like statistics, so it can be helpful for that purpose. But really talking to students and finding out what is impacting them day to day is how you're going to get a lot of the qualitative insights to make change. And I think that, again, using the student body to gather that information and make students feel like they're in a safe space to say so is key.
And I'm glad that you kind of mentioned that, because I see another question that has come up, and I guess all of you can answer this. What do you think higher education institutions should do to implement inclusion beyond tokenism and billboards? That is from Henriette, University of Toronto in Canada. So, by the way, love Toronto, one of my favorite places to go. But I think this is an even better question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think so often it is billboards and tokenism, unfortunately. Again, from working with quite a few institutions in the US and the UK, you start to see differences between the regions and what they're doing. And I would say that some institutions have a really great setup of steering groups, task forces that are there to promote inclusion. But actually, I think, sitting on university boards and seeing strategies that have been put together, quite often they're so reactive. They're like, if this issue comes up, here is the university's policy to deal with that issue. And actually, there's not enough proactiveness going on of saying, here are the issues that could impact our students in the future. Or may impact our students going forward. Here's what we are going to proactively do to ensure that our institution is inclusion so that those things don't come up. And I think so many institutions won't look forward and look elsewhere on what's happening to their minority student groups. They're just looking inwards. And so I think if we're going to promote inclusion, I think we were speaking about this before, it's a real shame there's no national body in the US that, and there might be, so if there is one, please put it in the chat function, but that is actually promoting what good inclusion looks like at a university and sharing that resource. And that's why these events are so good, because hopefully we can share little best practices that are happening. But I think having something that says, you know what, as a minimum, you should be doing this. That's really important. And having universities sign up to that and commit to that and pledge to saying, yes, we will do this as a minimum to promote inclusion, I think is what's really missing. Because you should be able to, as marketers, say to your institutions, we're really behind 90% of other institutions on our inclusion practices. That is not good. And we are promoting diversity, but not inclusion. And I'm not willing as a marketer to promote inclusiveness if we're in the bottom 10% of people who have an inclusive campus. So I just think there's something there, I think, about sharing best practice and creating some standards of what good inclusion looks like in the sector to give us the ability to almost lobby our universities to do more.
Jamila, Charee.
I think I'm sitting with the best practices. I think that we don't have to start from scratch. I think when it comes to conversations around inclusion, there's a lot of really good research, a lot of really good data. Higher education has come, I think globally, has come so far from the earliest days of higher education, right? Which there was only one kind of student, right? who was sort of allowed to attend and allowed to engage. So I think that moving away from sort of a deficit model of oh no, we don't know what to do, where do we start? That there are lots of good models that are out there. Sometimes you might have to look for them, right? And you have to do the work of figuring out what works for one institution is not necessarily going to work for another institution, depending on lots of things. I think the other thing is, I think we sometimes devalue the importance of an infrastructure of support. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, right, who are the people that are doing that work at the college explicitly in their roles and job responsibilities, and the folks that are doing it implicitly? And again, how are we holding folks accountable to that work? I think that something that I sort of struggle with a little bit is that, I think that diversity and inclusion should be a part of all professional performance valuations, that every single person should be able to answer, this is how I am contributing to the diversity, equity, and inclusion mission of the college. I think there's just a general kind of lack of accountability. And again, we put it on like individual offices or individual people to do that work, instead of sort of building an infrastructure of support, so that students, particularly students, don't have to be tokenized or further marginalized once they're on campus.
And Jamila, unless you have something to add, I do have another question from the audience. So I can go ahead and ask that. And you could be the first person to answer, or if you have an additional comment.
Oh, I have no additional comment. Proceed.
Okay, then this is from Monica. And Monica said there can sometimes be a big difference in the diversity of higher ed staff / faculty and the student body. How have institutions handled this gap? So maybe both Jamila and Charee, you all could talk about how you all are handling it or trying to close that gap in your institutions. And Jamila, I will start with you.
Sure. So I guess one of the ways that we kind of close that gap or try to work is we do have a lot of student organizations. We do have a lot of events, cultural events. Again, we also have like our committees and our task force, and we really try to collaborate and work together on certain things. Especially when it came with like the George Floyd situation and all the other violence that was happening, that was like an important opportunity to kind of bridge that gap and kind of all of us kind of come together um, cohesively as we can. And I think we did a good job with, kind of like our virtual events, our virtual town hall meetings, stuff like that. So I think just kind of having that open dialogue and that open communication helps as well. And also, we do have like student ambassador programs. I have my own program here where I work with students and I make sure that, I have a different range of students so that they are also kind of telling their story here too. And I think that's one of the ways that we kind of bridge that gap also.
And do you see a difference in the level of diversity, not just by numbers, but in other ways too, between the students and then also staff and faculty? I kind of know the answer to what Charee is going to say, but I'm going to ask you first, Jamila, and then Charee, you can go ahead and answer.
Well, I wish you had my answer. With our faculty and staff, I think it's diverse. I think at ODU, we do a lot of groups and organizations. I think we have like a group and organization for everything. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing.
Even for faculty and staff too?
Yes, we do have one for faculty and staff. So again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. We just do. So I really do feel like they think forward, as Murray said. It's not just think about what's going on now and thinking inward. I really do think that ODU thinks future and like, okay, what are we going to do? We don't just check a box, but let's continue to move this conversation. Let's continue to do this. And how are we going to do this? What is this going to look like in 5 years? What is this going to look like for 10 years? So I think they really do think about that. And I think it's because we do have these buckets. And I think it's because we do have these groups of who are kind of going to be accountable of diversity and inclusion. I think that's why we're able to kind of do that and bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what you think I'm going to say, Kevin. You probably do know that. So I do think there's a disconnect between sort of how we treat staff and faculty and how we treat students. Mm. Certainly one of the reasons that I enjoy working at Columbia is, there are so many different approaches you can take to like diversity and inclusion work structurally and organizationally, right? There are sort of endless ways that can look like. At Columbia, there is academic diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is sort of, they're the really academic DEI sort of side of the house. And so they have a pretty specific mission that focuses on curriculum and course development, as well as faculty development in terms of DEI pedagogy for the classroom, creating inclusive academic spaces. They also focus on recruitment and hiring of diverse faculty for the college, hosting events for staff and faculty to engage, sometimes handling sort of complaints and issues that involve faculty or things that are happening in the classroom. And it's kind of really fantastic because it takes a little bit of pressure off of like my office, right? We can really focus on meeting our mission, which is to serve and engage with students. So having a great relationship, I think, between those two offices um, has really been a game changer for me in terms of my experience. Oftentimes, working in sort of diversity and inclusion roles, it can be isolating. And so I really appreciate at Columbia, there are lots of folks that are doing this work explicitly. It's what they're,
Mhm.
paid to be focusing on, because it creates an opportunity for us to just have more folks around the table that are able to generate creative ideas, creative solutions, and to really think, I think, on a different level about diversity and inclusion in the ways that it can look.
And so we have 8 minutes left. So I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple more questions from folks as well before Poppy comes in and says, okay, time for the next one. So this is also from Henry at University of Toronto, which I can kind of answer this too. And then I would love for all of you to help me with this as well. Do you think there's a relationship between students' diversity and nutrition diversity? In other words, if you think you have a diverse student body, do you also offer them diverse nutrition food choices? How does that relate to inclusion? I can talk from my perspective as someone who ran international orientation, which we had a time when we first started doing international orientation if you haven't guessed, I worked at Columbia. That's how I know Charee. And before, the food was ordered from a different department. It wasn't under us. And because there wasn't an idea of what the students wanted, it was always very standard kind of American kind of stuff for orientation, as in it was, bagels and muffins for breakfast with some coffee, and then some sandwiches for lunch, and maybe some snacks here and there. And I know for our international students, when that first happened, many of them, especially since they had just arrived within the past 24 to 48 hours from their flights, they're hungry, they're tired, they're all of these different things. It actually, some of them, it even made them sick because it was food they were not used to. It was, so they're having all this gluten and a lot of bread. And for them, it was definitely a big adjustment. And it kind of, something like that, I think, even kind of steers away from your marketing. You talk about diversity, but then your food is for an American audience that's not American. So we changed that when it became more into our control of what to order. And that's when we tried to stay away from a lot of heavy gluten, have a mix of different things that were not only that were familiar yet different, because you want to educate with food, and I love doing that, but also things that were inclusive of the different dietary needs. We would, in advance, we would go ahead and collect that data when they're registering, like, are you vegan? Are you vegetarian? Do you not eat pork? Do you not eat beef? Whatever it may be, because we wanted to make sure there was a little bit of everything for everyone. And we thought about all those things in a way that also met budget requirements as well too, because budget is always an excuse. So you try to find a way to make that fit into the budget, and it's actually a lot easier than you think. Certain things that you wouldn't think of, like plantains, are vegan, but not everyone can eat that. So you have other things as well too that other people can eat as well. Even simple things as putting, like, oh, you have a salad that has feta. Don't have feta in the salad. Put the feta to the side. Now the salad is vegan. Serve it with a vinaigrette. Everyone will eat the salad, which is cool. But now you have something for your folks who are vegan to eat. Just very simple things like that very helps out with the students. So yes, I would definitely think that does relate to inclusion, especially when it comes from a first impression, when you're first arriving to any kind of orientation or visit day or admitted student day, just making sure that you have something that's diverse for folks to eat. Jamila, Murray, Charee, y'all want to add to that based on your experiences as well too?
Um, I think this is a really great question. I honestly never even thought about it. because I just never did. And I think it's just an awesome question, and it actually has me thinking and wanted to actually reach out to our dining services and just kind of delve deeper into it. I don't really I don't really eat on campus like that. Well, currently I'm only here once a month due to the pandemic, but even still, a lot of our things are really, I guess, are American. Like we have our standard Subway, Chick-fil-A, but we also have a dining commons that has different variety of food. But I've never really thought about the diversity and nutrition wise of that. So I think that's a great question. That's all I have to add to that to that part.
I also think it's a great question. And I think that it's even interesting, when we talk about like American food in America, it's so interesting to me because I'm like, what does that mean? America is a country that is very much founded and shaped by a story of immigration, right? So it's
Mhm.
interesting that we think of things like hamburgers and apple pie, right? Like those are the things that we think of as American. So um the sort of historian in me is like, oh, that's very interesting. And I'm sure there's lots of great research out there. Um, I think, in my experience and being in Chicago, it's a little bit easier because we're in such a large city. And so if there is, if you are an international student and you are looking for comfort food from home, you are going to be able to find your community and find a restaurant here in the city, right? Even kind of geographically, if that's something that you're looking for. But I do think there are explicit ties between identity and food. If you are a student that keeps kosher or halal. There's nothing worse than going to a meal, right? You're going to orientation and you're so excited to be there. And then you see like your kosher meal is set aside from everybody else's,
Mhm.
it's maybe lower quality, right? That sort of makes it's subtle ways that we can make people feel othered.
Yeah.
And subtle ways that we can make folks that we reinforce that something about you is not normative, quote unquote. And so, with inclusion, I think talking about food is so interesting because there's no sort of piece of the student experience that is untouched by inclusion, whether we're talking about, access to bathrooms or
Mhm.
even the fonts that we use in marketing, right? Like, using inclusive and accessible fonts for folks that have different learning disabilities or, learning styles or things like that. So there's no area of the student experience, I think, that is untouched by inclusion. For food, something that Columbia did, we just recently opened a student center, and those were part of the conversations around seeking vendors for that particular area. Was what are your options, your inclusive options for food, so that every student, right, regardless of their sort of diet, has access to good food, quality food, affordable food, that meets their needs, and is able for them or accessible for them.
So Murray, you have a minute to put, so if you have anything to add, because we're running short on time, unless
Yeah.
you give us an
I,
extra minute or so.
I was going to say, I agree. I think it's a really great question. I think a lot of institutions will do a day a year on their campus where they celebrate a specific culture and bring loads of food on campus. But in a way, that's not really that inclusive, to have it there for one day. We used to welcome students all over the world. They'd fly into my university in Bournemouth and we'd meet them at the airport, take them to campus. And even then, I remember them getting to see the food. And as you were saying, Kevin, like some of it would make them sick. Some of it wasn't what they were expecting. I know it's going to sound really silly, but I actually think by showcasing that you have food on your campus and you understand the nuances in food between different cultures, in a way promotes how diverse you are as an institution. And I know as a Brit in New York City, I miss my British food every day. And if there was an institution promoting that, or even an area of New York City promoting that, it would make me feel good, And so for people who are really experiencing big differences from being homesick, from traveling from other countries, I think it's a really, really great thing. I love the question. I think it's given me loads of thoughts and ideas of more things that institutions should be doing. So yeah, food is the way to the heart. So let's
Yes.
cook some good food.
Yes, that's my life motto. Give me food. You pretty much have won my heart if it's good. So that is my life motto. And I think I can squeeze in one more question. So I'm going to try to get this question from Brent. Have you noticed any trends around incoming students' interest in the issues? Are students getting increasingly involved in holding their universities accountable? I know this is a question that has a really big answer. So what have you all seen? I know, Jamila, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe Charee, you can kind of answer this as well. Because I have seen that Columbia students are very active when it comes to social justice.
Oh, okay, yeah, so the incoming students, I think because we kind of try to stay a little bit ahead and kind of like playing chess while everyone else playing checkers, we kind of try to make sure we're already there before they can even question or even say anything. So when we had the George Floyd and everyone, Breonna Taylor, all that, and we have this rock, using this as an example, we have this rock called Dominion Rock on our campus, and students here, again, we allow them to have that voice. And so they painted to the rock Black Lives Matter. And I was able to kind of post that on social media because, again, at that point, dealing with my own emotions, I was still able to have that lead and that trust and to develop this social media strategy of how are we going to educate on injustice, how are we going to do that, how are we going to give those voices. I was usually silenced, this voice, this platform. So able to kind of share that. And I'm alumni, prospective students who were about to apply were like, I'm glad I chose this school. I'm glad that this is what they're doing. Alumni, I'm glad this is where I graduated from. ODU's doing the right thing. So those were the kind of comments that we saw. So just seeing that prospective students are, kind of aware of what's going on. And again, students are very, very vocal. They will let you have it immediately. So the fact that we were doing something right and they were happy with, made my job easier. But also was like, yes, this is why I'm glad that I work here. And I'm glad that ODU actually does take a stand on issues, right, that they should. So yeah, students here, yes, perspective, they do care a lot.
Mm-hmm. It's true. They will drag you, and that's okay.
Drag you for
You
filth.
have to. Sometimes you need a good dragging. Sometimes
Yeah.
you just need it. If you're doing something that's out of pocket, like maybe you didn't realize you were doing, the students should drag you, and
Oh,
you take it in stride, learn from it, and move forward and do
they will
better.
call
So,
you out and you're like, ugh, they will hit you from the gut. And you're like, and some things you're like, you're absolutely right. I agree with you on that. But yeah,
Yeah.
right.
totally.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting is not only will students, call you out when you're not doing it right, the ways in which they're calling folks out, they're not using the moral argument, right? Of like, this is the right thing and you need to do the right thing,
Right.
as an institution. They have the receipts, right?
Yes.
So they are
And
able,
invoices.
yeah, so they are able to point to the places in the mission where you said that this is something that you value. They're able to point to the marketing materials or the stories that we sold them in admissions of you said when I came here, this is what I could expect. So they're paying attention, I think, in really in ways that I think sometimes we don't as administrators, that we don't necessarily give them credit for. And that they are really, their generation is really, certainly in the US, is really driving social movements in many different ways. I also think that students, in my experience, have a much more expansive view of activism than maybe we traditionally think about, right? So activism is not only petitions and protests and those sorts of things, but it also is, situated around money and situated
Mhm.
around conversations of equity. And so I think our students are thinking about activism in much more nuanced ways, again, than we sometimes give them credit for. And, you know, they will hold you to task. So if you put it out there publicly or even sort of internally, right, if you let them know, then they receive that information and they retain it, and they take you at your word. And so I think that, you know, institutions, maybe the days of sort of pulling one over on students are coming to an end.
Yeah, and look, you came at the perfect time, Poppy. I think that was something great to leave off.
Hello.
I was like, when is Poppy gonna pop in? I know, like, she goes in, she comes out and says, okay, next thing.
I didn't want to stop the session. I was enjoying that too much. I mean, the time was meant to be up 10 minutes ago, but I just wanted it to keep going. So thank you so much, all of you. That was a really thought-provoking, insightful session. And I can tell from the audience engagement on the live stream feed that everyone has been loving it too. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kevin, for hosting, and thank you, Charee, Jamila, and Murray for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.